Well, once again, I find myself in something of a quandary of knowing where to go in our time together. Having the opportunity to preach at small churches 2 weeks in a row, nice opportunity for me to get out and go and spend some time with people, prepare a message designed specifically for them in their context, and then to come back and pick up where we left off, wherever that happened to be. And as a part of my process, when I'm dealing with some degree of uncertainty about what I should do here, I'm always drawn to the fact that God is at work in all the circumstances. And for that reason, this is as much a journaling process and experience for me as it is to try to provide a lesson for you. And I'm convinced that it accomplishes both things. So just indulge me in this process. We had the privilege last week of our daughter, Abigail, coming and spending several days with us, understanding her mom's condition, which is progressive. It was a good opportunity for her to come and spend some time with us. So she flew into town last Tuesday. We picked her up at the airport. And she has a friend who lives in Sumter. Her husband is in the military and he was on deployment, and Abigail wanted to go see her friend. And so she talked to her on the phone, and her friend says, listen, while my husband is gone, you're welcome to use his car while you're there. And so we thought, well, that was a generous offer. So we immediately drove up to Sumter on Tuesday to take Abigail and her mom. And they had an invitation to go ahead and spend the night. So I deposited him there in that nice home in that nice neighborhood. And I came back to take care of some things here. And so Abigail and Sarah spent the first night there. And then the next day I was texted and said they want to spend another night. And I thought, well, that's fine. It's good for Sarah to get out. She always does better when she has those kind of experiences. Knowing all the time that she forgot to take her medicines with her. But anyway, so we're just going to deal with that in course. So they both spent a second night there, and then they came back in on Thursday because Sarah had an appointment with her neurologist that morning. So they drove back in early, and we met there at the neurologist and went through that process, and we spent another day knowing on Friday that she was going to need to return the car. So they left early. I had some other things to do, and so I followed suit. Now, it had been a long week for me, a challenging week, which most of them are for other reasons. I was fatigued, and I thought, well, I want to make an expedited trip to Sumter to retrieve them. We were then going to go to Manning, where our son and his family live, and spend a little time with them, and then come on home Friday night. So it was going to be a long day. And for those of you who may not be aware with Sarah's condition of frontotemporal dementia, challenging days are particularly challenging for her. A lot of activity is extremely exhausting for her. And so for her to persevere through that, I knew it was going to be very, very, very hard. So I'm making really good time going up to Sumter. I got within, it's like 75 miles from here, and I got within 20 miles. And I was on a 2-lane road. And I got behind 3 vehicles that were marginally going the speed limit. And I had already passed a number of cars, and so I pulled out around those 3 vehicles. One of them happened to be a car that looked just like this. I didn't think anything about it until I got in front and I looked behind, and this car had pulled out and it had blue flashing lights on it. So I found a convenient place to pull over, to stop, began digging for my registration information, and the trooper came up to me and said, I'm stopping you because you were speeding and you crossed the yellow line. I'm not so sure about that, but I knew I was speeding. And so we went through that whole thing. I couldn't find my registration stuff. He said, that's fine, I'll look it up. And so he also said, by the way, your registration is expired. And I'm like, I just bought this car last year. I haven't had it for a year. How can that be possible? He said, well, it is. And so he said, I wrote you a ticket for that. He said, it's a $155 ticket. I didn't write you, I just wrote you for the speeding. And he said, if you get this taken care of, I'll work with you when you come to court. And so I was bummed at that point. I was tired already. I was bummed with everything that was going on. And so I made my way on to pick up the girls and then make our way to Manning. And I tried to make the most out of it during that whole trip. And I was really not in a good place. Came back in Friday night and Saturday took Abigail to the airport and saw her back off to Phoenix. And so for me, when stuff happens, it's never at a convenient time. In this case, it happened on a Friday. I'm late in the afternoon. I'm needing to take care of some form of government business with my vehicle, and I can't do that till Monday. So I'm going to be driving on a vehicle with an expired registration and just take my chances. Although I know I have a copy of the ticket saying, listen, I've already been caught once. Let's not add salt to this open wound. And so I went up to the car dealership on Saturday and I said, somebody messed up. I said, this is what needs to be done. And the sales manager or whoever it happened to be said, well, he said, you were responsible for paying the property tax on this and then going to the DMV and getting the registration taken care of. And it's like, you mean you as a dealership, when you sell a new vehicle, you don't take care of all that? No, we don't. So, all right. So waited until Monday, got it Monday morning and made the rounds, stood in line at the tax office, stood in line at MVA, and finally got the registration stuff taken care of. And it was one of those occasions, not to bore you with details, when I just fell through the cracks. I had traded in a vehicle. I had transferred the tags from the old vehicle to the new vehicle. The old vehicle tags expired in August. I was buying a new vehicle in June. And so I have always promptly, when I've received renewal notification or registration, I take care of it immediately online in advance. So I have those in hand when the time comes to put a new sticker on. I'd received no notification because I had fallen through the cracks. Nothing had been sent out. The one registration had expired and nothing else had happened. And I was at the mercy of not paying attention to what had taken place. I got that all squared away. I had to pay property tax on last year of $900. I had to pay property tax, went ahead and pre-registered for the next year for $600 more. So a mere $1,500 got everything squared away, and that's before I go to court. I say all that to introduce the message today. And here's my text that I'm going to frame this with, and then we'll go from there. This is taken from Judges chapter 3. Now these are the nations which the Lord left to test Israel by them. That is, all who had not experienced any of the wars of Canaan, only in order that the generations of the sons of Israel might be taught war, those who had not experienced it formerly. These nations are the 5 lords of the Philistines and all the Canaanites and the Sidonians, the Sidonians and the Hivites who live in Mount Lebanon from Mount Baal Hermon as far as Lebo Hamath. They were for testing Israel to find out if they would obey the commands of the Lord which he had commanded their fathers through Moses. The sons of Israel lived among the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And they took their daughters for themselves as wives and gave their own daughters to their sons and served their gods. The sons of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and forgot the Lord their God and served the Baals and the Asheroth. Then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel so that he sold them into the hands of Cushan Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia, and the sons of Israel served Cushan Rishathaim 8 years. We're going to stop there. When you proceed reading from here, what you will discover is, under those circumstances, those conditions, God finally had their attention. Things were going great, and then they weren't. Life was good, and then life was hard. And when life got hard, the question was, where is the God of our fathers? For that reason, I've entitled our time together, When Life is Hard, because I find myself in one of those places where life is hard. And to try to make sense out of it. And so hopefully this will mean something to you in the process. First thing is, let's just deal with this context. Because you need to know that when I was sitting there waiting to receive my citation from this officer, And by the way, I thanked him for his service. I didn't blame him for what he had done. I knew I was guilty. But in my mind, I'm going through that and the whole slate of life issues that we're in right now. With Sarah's condition, which continues to progress, and I become increasingly uncomfortable with leaving her at home because I'm getting to watch. It's like watching the hour hand on a clock that doesn't have a second hand or a minute hand. And because I'm spending all day watching that hand, I can literally see it move, and it's not moving in a good direction. And I'm trying as hard as I can to do all that I can to make it as good as I can for where we are and what God has for us. But admitted you, life is hard. And so I'm asking my question in the context of having been stopped, having been rushing about, having been trying to squeeze all of this into the time allotted to make the most out of it. And my question is, God, what is it you're doing? Or what is it that I'm not seeing or learning? So when we step back and we look at this context in Judges, we find this is at the point of time when leadership is being passed on from one generation to another. We're familiar with the Exodus story as Moses was sent by God to lead Israel out of slavery, having been there for 430 years. Led them through a wilderness experience where they had an opportunity after a brief period to occupy the promised land, and Moses didn't assert his leadership as he should. He sent in 12 spies and he came back and then he did a survey and said, how many of you think we ought to go take it? And 10 of the 12 says, no, can't be done. Only 2 said we ought to do it. Moses conceded, gave in to the majority, and for that reason, 2 things happened. One, that Israel had to spend time in the wilderness to allow that generation that had been through the Exodus from Egypt to die, and only to allow their successors, the next generation, to go and occupy the land. That was one thing that happened. The second thing that happened was that Moses didn't get to go in himself. He got to see it from a distance, but he did not get to go in and possess it. And then the exception to the age limit of those who got to go in was Joshua and Caleb, the 2 spies who said, God promised it, He's given it to us, all we have to do is go take possession. God enabled them to go in and possess the land. They were the old people in this journey. Now I went back to try to find out how old Joshua actually was when the leadership reins were passed from Moses to him, and I can't find anything definitive. We know that he had been through, the wilderness for 40 years, so he's over 40. He comes in a position of leadership, and by the best guesstimation, it is believed that he may have been 20 when they left Egypt. So he is now perhaps 60-ish when Moses dies, and he takes over the responsibilities for leading Israel forward. So when they go in and they occupy the land, they go in and they conquer Jericho. We know that. They take a beating at Ai because somebody did what God said not to do, and everybody paid for it, which is always the case. And then as they go in and continue to conquer, God has promised that to the 12 tribes that each are going to get their portion of the promised land, the land that Abraham had walked over, that God had promised to him and to his descendants. And so Joshua went about the process of delegating who gets what land in portions based on the size of their tribe. And so now we've gone forward. Joshua has died at the age of 110. A new generation has come along, and Joshua is no longer there. And we read here that in that time, let me go back and look at this again. All right, the text said, now these are the nations which the Lord left to test Israel by then, only in order that the generations of the sons of Israel might be taught war, those who had not experienced it formerly. They hadn't conquered everybody. As a matter of fact, there's specific detail in there about which tribes went in and thoroughly conquered, and those that did not, those that allowed the enemy to remain among them. And you and I both know from the history of God's dealing with Israel in their journey from Exodus to the Promised Land, there were times when God intervened and interceded, and God did the fighting for them. Quite often he did it in conjunction with them, and those that died at the hand of God were greater than those that died at the hands of the men in armor. But in this case, they've settled into the land, and God has not driven out everybody in front of them. He left some enemy combatants, some nations, some pagan nations among them, because he had a purpose for them to teach Israel about war. And so when things went badly for Israel, it was because God had a purpose in their difficulties for them to learn some spiritual values and some issues they otherwise would not have learned. But rather than learning the lesson about how to fight well, how to trust God in battle, how to win a victory when you're surrounded, when you're outnumbered, when the odds are against you, instead of learning the lesson and applying it and going forward, they adopted and embraced the culture of pagans around them. And God did what? God punished them. The anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel so that he sold them into the hands of the king of Mesopotamia. And they served him for 8 years. So that's the context of this account of when life is hard. And it introduces really something of the purpose that God has for that. Now, you and I that are familiar with Paul's writings in Romans, when he comes to Romans chapter 8 and verse 28, he synthesizes this whole spiritual principle that regardless of time or regardless of circumstances, regardless of the players, regardless of the details of any of those variables, Paul writes, and we know, both mentally and experientially, that in all things, which means in all circumstances, under all conditions, God is at work for the good, for those who love him, who are the called according to his purposes. Now, one of the problems we have in dealing with that is the conditioning that we've experienced from birth until we encounter our first set of difficulties. As believers, and I can only speak to it as believers, that if we've been raised in a culture and a context like the Israelites had, Moses had received the law of God, Moses had established a priesthood descendant of Aaron, he'd set aside a tribe, the Levites, that didn't get to possess a piece of real estate in the promised land, in order for them to have this ongoing relationship with a living God who communicated to them through the prophets and through the priesthood. A sacrificial system for dealing with sin, both known and unknown sin, a way to remain in a right relationship with God. And so they had been a part of that. And going into the promised land, those who had rejected the promise of God to take the possession of the land, they were denied that opportunity and they died. They didn't get to go in. And a new generation was raised up under the leadership of Joshua, who proved himself to be a very faithful, dedicated, committed, capable leader. And even to the point where you had a whole generation of boys who had not been circumcised before they got to occupy the land. They were all circumcised to be in compliance with God's covenant relationship with Abraham and his descendants. And they got to see some remarkable, this new generation got to see some remarkable things. They got to see the parting of the Jordan for them to go across and occupy the land. They got to see the miracle of the walls of Jericho falling down at the sound of shouting and trumpets, and then to go in and take possession and to win that battle. They saw what it was when God's face had not been sought in the next little battle they had when they went against Ai. Didn't go in full force, didn't seem to consult God as to what they should do. They assumed they knew what to do, and they were sadly mistaken. And they were beaten back and defeated, and they felt defeated. And Joshua falls on his face and is like, what did we do wrong? And God says, there's a time to pray, there's a time not to pray. This is not a time to pray. You just fouled up, and it's time you make it right. Somebody took prohibited items in the conquest of Jericho and have hidden those things, and because of that, everybody's having to pay. And so you need to find out who that is. They went through a sequence of casting lots and determining what tribe it was and what family it was and who the individuals were. And they took them out and stoned them to death. And then they won a victory against Ai. And then going forward to see the fact that the land was afraid of them. They'd seen the reports, they'd heard the reports. And so people lived in fear of this invading army of the descendants of Abraham. But everybody didn't run off in fear. And so as each individual tribe went out to possess their land, it was theirs to take. They got to take cities that had already been built. They got to occupy land that had already been cultivated. They got to, they got to accept that which they had not had to work for, because God was gifting it to them as a part of His promise to Abraham. But the condition was that they had to walk in faith and faithfulness and obedience to His commands, His requirements, and His expectations. Most of them did it. Some of them did not. And when the going got hard, when they said it's just too difficult, they have chariots with iron wheels, they've got too many horses, they made all these excuses not to go and occupy and destroy and eliminate and eradicate the enemy, that they chose to live with them. And while God could have intervened and wiped them out by disease or hail or some other form, He chose not to. He chose to allow the enemy to remain the enemy, to teach Israel lessons that Israel did not seem to be capable of learning any other way. So when life is hard, when things don't work out, when you find yourself at a seeming disadvantage, when you feel like you're overwhelmed, the question, I don't think, is, where's God? I think the question really is, where are we? Or in my case, where am I? I'm not without flaw. I'm not without sin. I'm committed to serving God for the rest of my life. But I have been put in a set of circumstances here that I did not anticipate or expect when I stepped away from full-time pastoring. It's been 8 years ago, come this next month. But planning on remaining engaged, and I have run hard, and I have run fast, and I have built bridges, and I have this expansive network here of people that I know and love me, and in some ways I've been treated with more respect than I felt like I ever was when I was a pastor. And I've celebrated that, but at the same time, watching as Sarah, for whom I've been married now 48 years, August will be 49 years, looking forward to these days when the kids are gone and when life simplifies and we can start look around and saying, well, then what do we do with the balance of our lives that we can enjoy and be faithful and obedient what God has called us to do? Got plugged into a good church. And again, trying to do all that I could do to ensure that my life has holy purpose for the rest of my days, only to learn last year that Sarah has frontotemporal dementia, which is a irreversible, unstoppable, progressive disease that the journey for everyone is unique to their own. Some live with these conditions for 20 years, some live with these conditions for just a few years, depending on where you are in it. And so we're a part of that journey of saying there's some things that we thought we were going to be able to do that evidently we can't do. She had to give up driving immediately. And so we went down to one vehicle. And I've steadily watched the challenges that come with that. Short-term memory is done. Can't do any math calculations. Not sure what day it is without looking at something and then not remembering that. I mean, I'm not going to go into all the details. You can read about that. But it's been an unpleasant, and it's been a very hard thing to sit and to know that I am personally powerless to do anything about it. I've got a refrigerator that we bought 8 years ago, a new refrigerator, a Samsung, nice refrigerator. But they inherit a manufacturing flaw in the ice makers. So the company replaced it 3 times, and they finally said, well, that's all we're going to do, you're on your own. So I've replaced it 2 or 3 times, and it fouled up again, and it's like, I just got, I got sick and tired of messing with it. And I was in there working on it in the kitchen, trying to get, troubleshoot and saying, this side of replacing more stuff, that it occurred to me, And it was an overwhelming experience that through our 48 years of marriage, I'm good with these. I'm good with this, but I'm good with these. And that whatever the challenges we've had with stuff, whether it was a house or a vehicle or a computer or plumbing or electrical, all that kind of stuff, I could do whatever needed to be done. The reason we have what we have is because over the years, I could do the work, I could do the labor, and I saved us enormous amount of money, which means the money we had could go further. But I'm standing in the kitchen thinking, you know, I've been able to fix everything in our lives for 40 years, 48 years, but I can't fix my wife. Now that's a tough admission for me, but it is a reality. And so in the midst of all that is going on, I'm continually asking the questions, God, what is it that I need to see? What is it that I need to hear? What is it that I need to do? How do I position myself that I'm walking in faith, walking in obedience, knowing that I don't control these variables? The reason that Abigail had made a trip to see us, and she's working a couple of part-time jobs, which means when she doesn't work, she didn't get paid. And so that's a tall order for her. Was that a few weeks back, I went back and doing research because watching the progressive decline in Sarah to go back and refresh my memory on the details and try to figure out some sort of a timeline and where we are in that. And there was an article entitled The 7 Stages of Frontotemporal Dementia. And I went and read through those, and one of the things it says is people typically are not diagnosed in the first 2 stages because you just write off, you know, those symptoms as normal aging, and that everybody experiences those. So you number one, you don't want to think the worst. You just want to think this is a natural, normal part, and you just embrace it and live with it until things get to be rather extreme and pronounced, and then you know something's wrong. And so I had sent that article I sent it to Sarah on her phone, and I asked her to read it. And I said, I want you to read this and tell me, what stage do you think you are in? And she read it, and she said, I think I'm in stage 6. And I said, I would concur, knowing that there are only 7 stages. And this particular article says that every stage is between 1 and 2 years. It doesn't take a mathematician to do the math and know that those aren't good numbers. And so I sent the article to our daughter to apprise her and explain the situation. And so that's when she booked a flight to come and see us and spend time with us. And she got to witness firsthand the decline just since December in her mom. And so here I am sitting, you know, on the side of the road having received this ticket, and then proceeded from there within the speed limit to go and retrieve them, that I'm having that conversation with God. I'm not unlike the Israelites when they're surrounded by the enemy. They're not enjoying the promises and the blessings of God, and they're wondering what's going on. I'm in that place. I'm not looking for overt or covert sin. I'm looking to see what is it that I'm not hearing God say. What is it that purpose? If God is at work for the good in all circumstances, then what is it God is trying to do in me? And that's been something of my mantra now for the last year and a half, is what is it, God, that you are doing in me, so that I can yield myself to it, so that I can give myself to it, so that I can do what needs to be done. And you know what, I'm convinced. I don't expect anybody to believe this or to understand how it works, and it's a part of your challenge as a believer, based on your life circumstances and your commitment to walk in faith and to trust God fully for your needs, to walk in obedience to those things that you know are right and wrong and that please God and don't please God. That, you know, what is it that God is saying to you at any given time? And I'm convinced what he said to me was, slow down. You're running too hard. You're trying too hard. You're running too fast. you're approaching a time when you're going to have to stop because the needs of your wife are going to require it. And you might as well start slowing down now in preparation for that time. That's tough. But I'm convinced that that is true. When you look at what God said to Israel, Joshua's gone, a new generation's in charge, they're not doing too well. They're paying a price of spiritual disobedience. But God intentionally left the enemy among them to shape them, to teach them about war, to teach them about spiritual obedience, because He had purpose for them yet to be unfolded in the road ahead. So I thought about my circumstances, or our circumstances, that God is using these to shape me. I regret that there are those out there that are high profile, have millions of followers, who are convinced that if you just walk in faith and do everything right, that you're going to have a hunky-dory journey. That God is going to bless you, you're going to be prosperous, you're going to be healthy, your kids are not going to get sick, your dog is not going to die, all that kind of stuff, as though that is God's intended purpose and plan for every believer. We are imperfect creatures, still marked by the fall of Adam and Eve and everything that we do. And our best case doesn't eliminate the consequences of our sinful nature, while at the same time we can walk in complete obedience, but God is going to continue to shape us by our set of circumstances. And difficulties are the instrument that God uses to do that. I thought about, here's an image of these two astronauts that we heard about, Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams. I took particular interest because Butch Wilmore, while he was in space being interviewed before they got to come back down, he got to share about his family and his kids, and he had a daughter who was attending East Texas Baptist University, which happens to be not only where I graduated and Sarah graduated, but where we met, and it was while we were there that we got married. So here are two astronauts that were planning on an 8-day trip to space when the engineers, when the equipment couldn't go to retrieve them, and they spent 9 months in orbit. Elon Musk, God bless him, sent his craft to retrieve them. The reason I thought about this is because if you follow much about space exploration and astronauts, that while weightlessness is sort of an entertaining thing, we get to see them in space and do goofy things, that weightlessness is very unhealthy for the human body. That one of the things that happens is our bone density begins to decrease, and prolonged time in weightlessness can be detrimental to our whole skeletal system. And it affects every other functions of our brain, our heart and our brain and our kidneys and our liver and every part. You see that gravity, while it hurts when it causes us to fall down, is something that God uses to make us stronger for the life that we have. We weren't designed to live without the resistance of gravity. It's why those of us who choose to subject ourselves to going to a gym. There are a lot of people that go to a gym that get absolutely no benefit other than their own egos have been stoked because they've gone and they've done some stuff. And I watch novices come in and they'll pull around stuff and pick up stuff and move around stuff. And I watch, to them, they're accepting no resistance to their motions. And the whole benefit of weight training regimen is to create resistance to cause our muscles to want to grow stronger and healthier. And it's the resistance that it is not fun. I got to tell you, I go because I need to go, but there are a lot of things that are just unpleasant for me to do. But the benefit is only derived when the routine is unpleasant, because it is fighting against my desire to move it. And that's what God uses, the circumstances of our life, whether it's enemies, whether it's problems, whatever it happens to be, that He uses those things. It's like Paul's thorn in the flesh after he'd had a vision of heaven. That God gave him a thorn in the flesh lest he become overwhelmed with pride about what he had got to experience. That was a shaping, and for him the shaping thing was that, buddy, just get used to being weak, because when you admit you're weak, that's when God does His best work in you. That hard times, difficult times are the times when God honestly does the greatest work in us. And right now, He is truly in work at me through these circumstances. Israel went the rest of their journey, and while they would get it right for a season, it didn't take long until they would go backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards for another 400 years until finally they were sent into Babylonian captivity, and that broke some of it. And then they were finally dispersed among the nations after the crucifixion of Jesus and the destruction of Jerusalem. And it wasn't until 1948 when they came back together as a nation to refine their place in God's plan. So this is where this is the landing I want to come in for, is that for you and me, number one, we need to have a plan and a purpose that pleases and honors God and commits ourselves, body, mind, spirit, every part of our being, to serve His purposes, to honor Him, that what we say and what we do in all of our lives. That needs to be by design and by purpose. And when we give ourselves fully to that and things go wrong, we need to accept that too is a part of the purposes and the plan of God to shape us in the image of Jesus Christ. And so we need to slow down, and we need to ask those questions, and we need to start listening to that still small voice of the Spirit telling us what it is that we need to do now and what it is that we need to do next, knowing that next day or next week or next month or next year, we're going to be back going through something else, because God is not finished with us until He receives us into glory. This is my final image here. This is the scene that we all hate. I'm more grace challenged when I get in my vehicle than any other time. And we come to it in our area because the growth is just so phenomenal. There are areas of our state that are the fastest growing in the nation, and I'm in a town that's one of the fastest growing, and so the infrastructure will never catch up, the roads will never get caught up, and so the traffic is just a nightmare. And so you come to these scenes, and they are an interruption. They foul up our plans. They mess up our strategy. It takes us longer to get places, and sometimes we can't get there. We have to reroute. And I'm thinking, if this represents life, and when things are going well, we like it because we can get there expeditiously, we can get there in comfort, but then we encounter those places under construction. And so you'll have somebody out there, and quite often you'll see, before you get there, as a warning, you'll see a sign that says something like this: caution, men at work. And so I got to thinking, if we were to create a sign that said caution, God at work, what would that sign look like? You know what? I think the sign would look just like this. It would look like a construction zone with things that are uncomfortable, things that are inconvenient, things that are difficult, things that are problems. That would be evidence that God is not necessarily punishing us, but God is shaping us for His purpose, for the next great thing He wants to do in us and for us, and then through us to those around us. So I would ask that you pray for me and pray for us as I slow down, as I decline opportunities, as I not get out, as I try to find a way to make sure that Sarah is not left alone at any time through this whole process, and that God's grace will be sufficient for me to learn to be still and to trust Him with what lies ahead. Let me pray for us. Father, I thank You that You've enabled me to do this very difficult thing in confessing, reading where I read, knowing it's a part of the journey to learn what You're doing in me. So I thank You for the privilege of being able to record this and send it out so that others might be ministered to. I thank You for being sufficient, more than sufficient for all of our needs, and You can be fully trusted regardless of the circumstance we find ourselves in. as I commit myself and Sarah to you in this journey, we want to be used, and we want you to be pleased, and we want lives to be touched by your power through us. It's in Jesus' name we pray, and for his sake. Amen. Thank you for tuning in. I'd like to hear from you. You can reach out to me at this email address. I'd love to correspond with you, answer your questions, hear your criticisms. So please reach out to me. And remember, we're a 50c3 nonprofit organization, and we're supported by the faithful giving of many of you to be able to do what we're doing. And so if you'd like to give, there's electronic ways of doing that. And if not, if you're old school and you just want to, we can still write check, drop a check in the mail to this address, make it out to Church Rebirth Ministries Incorporated, and it will be received with gratitude, and I will put it to God's use as he allows me to. Thank you, and we'll see what's going on in life next week.